Hello and welcome to Perch Peak Pods, the only place to get long-form interviews with some of the world's leading global mobility experts. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Nikki Thomas from Micron. Nikki, introduce yourself to the community and tell us how you fell into the world of mobility.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here today. Thanks for having me. It's always fun when we get to do something a little bit out of the norm.
Yeah.
I've been at Micron coming up almost 10 years. I originally started out in an administrative role in the people team, and then I got a little bit of exposure to the mobility group. They actually had me help with a policy revamp they did about 8 years ago, a long time ago. And then there was an opening and I just kind of jumped in and I've been in there ever since. It's been awesome. I remember my very first day actually in the role, they added me into a check-in meeting that we had with like the international corporate tax team and finance and travel, and just listening to like their challenges. I was like, oh man, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah, you're sort of thinking, well, this seems complicated. But tell us about that decision then. You sort of started off in a generalist admin role. What was there something in particular that made you think, oh, this mobility thing sounds interesting? Like, what was the thinking when you made that first step?
Yeah, definitely. I loved that the team was so global. I was really excited to work with more of a global team and to really just experience other cultures and then to assist team members as they make that transition.
Yeah, I think that's often such a underrated aspect of the role, but it's so global and varied therefore because of the people you get to speak with. And that's definitely one of the aspects I love most about the industry, is just you're constantly learning about the crazy world out there. So we're going to really dig into some details today, which I'm looking forward to, because I think let's set the scene a little bit. You've been therefore sort of in Micron's mobility function for quite a while now, and I know you've been through some big changes in terms of policies over the last few years, and in particular done the sort of dreaded / much necessary policy consolidation and everything around that. So tell the community a little bit about the project, why you decided to consolidate, and what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to set the scene a little bit, I think it's challenging when you have a mobility team that really isn't centralized, or they don't all report up to the same structure. So in our background, we had teams reporting all through different groups within the people team. We all kind of ran our own programs almost like by region. And so over the years, it just grew to, hey, we have this need, let's create this policy and let's create this policy. And all of a sudden we find ourselves, with 40 policies, right? Just a ton. And that becomes so much for all of the teams to manage. Not only mobility, but our internal partners, stakeholders, our vendors, the RMC, our suppliers, our hiring managers, right? Like it trickles down everywhere, and for the team members too. And so really our main kind of thing we've been saying during this is simplify. Yeah. Main goal, really to just enhance that experience. And now too, that technology's come such a far way. It's really allowed us to dive more into the flex globally where we can.
And tell us then, so many questions, because this is right in the sweet spot in terms of like what so many leaders face with their programs. Tell us a little bit about the program then. You mentioned it used to be quite regional, the policies. That was a policy suite for APAC, a policy suite for EMEA, a policy suite for America. Was it even more fragmented than that? What was the sort of initial starting point?
Yeah, not even so. We would even have it by country. So like in APAC, we would have a policy for Taiwan, China, Japan, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere. And then we would have multiple international. So we'd have like international APAC, like international if you're moving APAC to the US, just a bunch of different international ones as well. And so really what we did was we looked at all of our current policies and we said, okay, what is similar and what is different? And why is it different? So a lot of times I think that's, you have differing costs because of costs or like level of team member, the talent, type of talent you're moving, the category. And so really just diving into what's important, what has to remain different. And like from a philosophical benefit standpoint, like where can you really condense that, and really looking at it too, like not even from that perspective, but also like cost, your company culture, So really, we that's what we did. We took all of our policies. We said, what's the same? What's different? Why is it different? And then where we could, we said, okay, that's where we started to introduce more of the flex, because I think flex is a really good solution for that.
Yes, and we'll definitely dig into to the flex aspect of it. I want to go back to the sort of the impetus to make this change, in the sense of, it's working regionally. There's definitely some pain, but it's quite shared, right? It's like everyone has like a little bit of pain by it being so piecemeal across 40 plus policies. What was the trigger that made you go, oh, actually, yeah, now's the time we should focus on simplifying it? Was there a trigger, or was it just evolution?
Yeah, I think it definitely kind of evolved over the years, but probably one of our biggest catalysts was that we changed our RMC. And so having to transition everything, our prior RMC we had been with for a very, very long time, and they kind of went through that growth with us. And so now transitioning everything to going through that was really a catalyst, saying, okay, this is not manageable.
I love that, to be like, oh wow, that has evolved quite weirdly, and like now having to reset up the policies, you're like, oh, and then we have that a lot where you're like, do you mind explaining exactly why this is and it's like it's never been a conscious decision. So
exactly, like these seem very similar, there's one thing different, like why do we have all different policies, right?
Exactly. So crazy. And then it's like, you mentioned one of the things I thought was really interesting there was you mentioned some of the impact on HR business partners, on vendors, and it's like everyone wants to adhere to policy, right? But that just actually does create a lot of churn and panic, and for people that aren't like involved every single day, like your talent acquisition team or whatever, it just gets a bit confusing for them, and it gives them.
And two, from an exception standpoint, when they're used to doing in one policy and all of a sudden we're flipping to another, it's kind of like, well, hey, we do that with that one. Like, and so then you're trying to manage all of that as well.
Yeah. And so you mentioned, because I can tell people listening are going to be thinking, oof, we have too many policies too. I'd love to sort of tidy it up. You mentioned we a bit in terms of we started evaluating, what were the real differences, what did we want, etc. What was the working group looking at this like? Was it done cross-functionally across different regions? Was it mainly mobility folk? Were you roping in other teams? Like, tell us a little bit about the actual work involved in looking at what the best solution would be for Micron.
Yeah. So once we had that mapped out, we really did a lot of different focus groups with different stakeholders. So team members themselves that had gone through our program, we had about 500 responses.
Wow.
Just saying, hey,
awesome.
This is what you received. Like, if you had to rank things, would you have wanted more flex? And just really, we'd ask them just a ton of different questions. And from that, we also asked them who would be willing to dive deeper into it and do more of like a focus group. So we started with the survey, and we had a really good amount that volunteered to do a focus group. So then we really got to dive in more with that group. And then, yes, we talked to the recruiters, the business partners. We talked a little bit to the finance group that does our budgeting. So really, we tried to get perspectives all around and then kind of craft this new framework.
Nice. And tell us about that process. So that sounds like you're getting feedback from lots of different places. You're getting some sort of quantitative data, focus groups. So I imagine you're piling that into some document somewhere. Then you're sort of probably taking some feedback scores from other like surveys, etc. So you've got all of this disparate work going on. Like, what did you consolidate that into, and who did you share that with? Was it a big PowerPoint that you ended up taking to HR leadership? How did that look like?
Yeah, so we consolidated all of that, and then we really just kind of, I sat in a room with leadership, and we were literally in there for 4 hours workshopping and just like back and forth, like, okay, we have it, like, what if we did this? How can we fit in this? And then we had a whiteboard literally that was just like completely full with all of these different, like, us trying to map things out. And so once we went through that process, we actually got a really good, like a core to share with others. So we went back to all those groups and said, hey, we heard your feedback. Here's where we think it landed. Does this sit with you? And there was a couple, and we had to make some more tweaks even after that. So we heard from the team. So we went back to them, and then we kind of really got this strong framework in place. And right now, instead of rolling it out globally, we're piloting it with one of our teams. So like a heavy user in our business, and that has, good volume globally, where we could say, hey, does this work in Japan and Taiwan internationally, right?
Yes. Yeah, so many questions then. So I love that sort of sitting around the whiteboard being like, okay, let's get sort of pen to paper or things up on the whiteboard. It forces some decision making. What were some of the sort of surprising things for you during that process?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think we were surprised with just how much we had to really go back and forth with the feedback that we got from the team members.
Mm.
And so trying to quantify that into an actual framework and like
Yes.
mapping out. So like you get the framework together, but then mapping out, okay, how are we actually going to apply benefits within this? That
Yep.
was I was surprised with how much went into that. And then trying to also do a cost analysis perspective of that.
Oh wow. Okay, great. So let's go. You mentioned this word framework a couple of times. What do you mean by framework versus a policy? Because I think that's something that people often get a bit not sure about. Like, how did you think about it in this project?
Yeah, that's great. So to set the scene a little bit too, I mentioned for our permanent reload policies, we were over about 20 globally. And
Yeah.
so with this new framework, and we've been calling it a framework, but it is policies within the framework as well. What we tried to do was map out the type of category that we have with relocation. So entry level, critical talent, technical experts, executive leadership. And so we talked about what are all of the different types of categories within talent that we relocate. And then where would that sit in a framework where we're trying to have everybody globally adhere to this? And so with that said, just to give you maybe a picture, you can almost think of it like maybe a triangle, right? And so we had over 20. We're pushing all of that into 3. And so now we drop that down to 3 with a domestic and an international version of each. So each of those categories, like we had lumped like executives, we had lumped different types of talent. And so we consider each of those like a policy within the overall framework. So the framework, like that full triangle, we consider that the framework, and then the policies within.
That makes a lot of sense. So you sort of have the high level macro and then the specific policy by
the guiding principle.
Yes, is the same, and I think that's helpful to have those guiding principles for making things work. You mentioned then that core flex and the flexibility really helpful for our. Well, actually, I'll let you speak to it. What was the flexibility helpful for as you went through this process?
Yes, I absolutely love Core Flex. I am a huge promoter of it and will always sing praises to Core Flex. It was really helpful in this process just because when you're moving from specific benefits to each country or each region, in order to have all of that pulled into the same framework policy, you need to have some flex components. And so really what we did to help address those very specific, well, in Japan, it's really important we provide X, Y, and Z. Taiwan needs this. And so that flex can help adhere to that. And it was really interesting because what we found out when we did those focus groups and surveys with the team members that had relocated is some of the things that we thought like, oh, we have to provide that in that country. When we did those surveys and focus groups, we actually found out they would have preferred to pick a different option. Like really, they didn't necessarily think that they wanted or needed that thing that we thought they did, right?
Yeah.
And so that was super interesting. So really having these core benefits where we say, okay, let's, depending on your category, we're going to provide X, Y, Z, and then having more of it be flexed. So the team member, we do it where the employee gets to choose. And I think that there's a lot of concern about that with some groups because of cost perspective. And so really, but we just really found that, the businesses and leaders, they don't know what people need for their relocation. So the employee, and there are some creative ways you can get around that if you're concerned about costs, like almost bucketing, like some flex items are more expensive than others. So you could even have buckets of, okay, you get to pick 2 within this bucket, 3 within this bucket.
Yes. And so what did you end up doing any of that bucketing, or you left it completely up to the employee?
Right now, we're leaving it completely up to the employee during this pilot. That'll be some. So once our pilot's done, when we start to do some of that cost analysis, we'll look at that. Because we definitely know there's some, right? Like extending temporary housing, that's an expensive flex. Temporary
exactly.
Expensive. So we know, right, that there's going to be some costs that are higher. But I think we really tried to, from just an equality perspective, get away from that mindset that flex equals dollar amounts. So we're no longer saying, right, you have 3 flex, that equals, 1,500 or whatever the case is. Instead, we're just doing it solely with services. So you get to pick a benefit. What do you need to help you? Like, we know a household goods shipment in this country is going to be more expensive in that country, but we're fine with that. Like, we want it to be equitable. What do you need? And we want to provide what you need.
Yeah, so very much we're asking you to relocate, therefore we'll give you what you need to relocate, and the sort of cost of that is on us, which I think is a great approach. I'm going to ask 2 follow-up questions around this. You mentioned at the time of building that framework, you're around the whiteboard and it comes up, someone asks like, well, how much is this going to cost? And I think that's every sort of mobility person is like, oh, well, sort of depends how much stuff they have, and depends on the time of year for temporary accommodation and how soon they book the flights. And it's kind of like this vague sort of pot. How did you address that challenge in the first instance?
Yeah, we just had to really put together a few different estimates. And we had that come up a lot too with the flex. Like, how do you estimate for flex?
Exactly.
So really, in our experience, we've seen that these are the top 5 usually that people want to choose. So we use that a lot in our estimates, but knowing someone might select something different. And so really just having, I think, that expectation set that this is an estimate, and we do, it's going to vary depending on their family size, like you said, and the location and time of year and all of these things. But really just having different estimates. I think really a lot of times they just want to be able to see something, just have an idea, like, right? A ballpark. So.
Yes, exactly. And it's I think if you manage the expectations successfully, people would rather have something than nothing. And if you say it's vague, it's like, yeah, great. And on that, talk me through. So one of the challenges we see when you put it with the employee choice is the estimate can end up varying wildly versus, if you're like, we're definitely going to give them this, you can sort of cap it, or you put a dollar cap on it, then, you obviously can cap it. Do you bother with a cost estimate now per relocation, or what have you done in terms of that process?
Yeah, we just have some general estimates off of different locations that we use. So we don't do it specific for each relocating family. So we tell our recruiters and leaders, depending on their family size, different things, this estimate, there might be a 5% variance or whatever the case is. But really, they just kind of use those general estimates as a guiding. Cool. And a lot of times it's just for approval purposes. Right. And then you think about when somebody actually relocates, that might be 6 months down the road, and then all the costs come in and taxes. So all final costs might not hit, for 2 years. Yeah. And so often it's these things trickle in. And so you provide a good estimate knowing that it's going to be different than that a little bit, but it's so spread out that as the costs are occurring, it's usually fine, right?
Yes,
it's very hard to budget for it.
Yeah, exactly. I tell you, the sort of initial funneling, did you always know you wanted to sort of stick with and keep a core flex program? Once you trim down the number of policies, that was sort of known beforehand, or were you evaluating what's the best fit based on the feedback from the different countries and relocators?
Yeah, I think we would have been open to if we had seen something different, but really everything was, they love the flexibility. We needed to have some kind of a flex component in it. And so we expected and kind of stayed that route. We're almost calling this our Core Flex 2.0 because we've actually had Core Flex policies for almost 8 years. So this, though, is introducing it in some of the countries that have never had it. So we've always had it. Our international assignment policy has been Core Flex, US. There's very, very specific ones where we've had it for a while, but now it's an opportunity to start extending that to some of our countries that have it.
Yeah. Such a cool opportunity to sort of standardize and say let's do this globally. It sounds like it's been working well in the markets you have been using it. It's such a hot topic amongst GM leaders. What have been some of the biggest benefits you've seen of the Core Flex approach?
I think it helps get rid of that mindset of, in lieu of this benefit, I need something else. So you have a very standard program that's very, this is what we provide. You have people that say, hey, I don't need this. Can I get cash, or can I use it for this? So it's really a way to manage that. It gets rid of that whole mindset of, it's use it or lose it, and this is all you're getting. I think that most companies, relocation, right? We do what we need to for the most part to get somebody from point A to point B. Like we're
Yeah.
going to do goods, we're going to do all these things, right? We're going to get you there. But I think where the real differentiator comes in is in that experience piece for the team member, and having some type of a flex component really enhances that experience, just because it makes them feel like, hey, I get to pick what's right for me and my situation and my family.
Yes, I love that. I love that so much. And it is just, this is from the provider side, is amazing. Almost like the more detailed and granular the managed policy is, the more it's like, oh, well, I don't need this, so can I have that? And it's a natural question, right? To be like, well, this doesn't really apply to me. So it does just create all those exception requests, the more prescriptive the policy is.
Yeah, and I think it enhances that inclusion piece of it, because, they have this like, this doesn't apply to me, I don't have kids, or I don't have this, right? Well, let's help support you with what you do. Like, let's help support with what you need. So I think that it helps with that inclusion piece of it, where we're trying to really enhance that experience and allow them to feel like we are going to support them in their situation.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, and it's like cool to hear a big program that's had it for a while, sort of really recognizing those benefits. Let's talk about the pilot setup. So you mentioned you went with one group that has good volume across multiple markets. How did that come about, and how are you thinking about measuring the sort of success of the pilot? Because I think that's something we've personally seen it. We've heard others in the community sort of say, yeah, we did this pilot and then we weren't really sure how it went. So like, how have you sort of set it up?
Yeah, that is great. It was really important to us that we met with a group, or we were able to pilot with a group that had volume in all of the different locations. So we could get feedback in Asia, the US, via different groups that we're in. And really, so when we had started out with those focus groups, the business partners were a big part of that. And so we were partnering with them, saying, hey, who might be willing to partner with us on a pilot? We've narrowed it down to a few different groups, and here's where we're at. And, do we have any hand raisers that are willing to do that?
Nice.
And we were excited with the team that we're piloting with. They also are very, very, they're a strong leader within our company. And so, so far we've gotten really good feedback, and I think that they can help champion it for us. So when we're ready to make that transition for a global rollout, we're going to have strong business champions within the teams that are going to help promote it for us, which I think is so helpful when you're trying to make a big change. Like if you have a leader that's gone through it, that's like, hey, this is awesome. Like you guys need to get on board. It makes all the difference.
Such a big nugget to sort of not have it just be a central HR rollout, get on some champions who can help you sort of lead the charge. And as you say, if that leader themselves has gone through the program, even if it may have been at a different company, like it's always amazing when you look at leadership, how often 50% plus of the C-suite have relocated at some point in their career, and find them, ask how it was, because they're much more likely to be brought into mobility than someone that's never gone through it themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, so when it comes to how are we going to actually measure and look at, was a success? What do we need to change after the pilot's done? So our initial plan was kind of to pilot it for around 6 months and give us a couple of months to kind of make changes, get that feedback before we look at rolling it out. I think what's going to be important for us is, we made this framework based off of feedback from team members. A big group is everyone that actually relocated through the pilot. We're going to run a focus group with them and hear, did this work? Was it enough? Was it not? Was it too much? Which, we often don't hear that, but
probably not the biggest pool of people.
And then looking at the cost as well. So we did that cost analysis. Were we on target with where we thought, or, are we way over, way under, making some shifts there. And then really, I think if we get close to, when we're talking to these team members, the leaders, I think we're going to be targeting around an 80% satisfaction rate.
Nice.
Making tweaks, of course, based off of that feedback, and then really look at what do we need to change before we do a global rollout, and then having, like I mentioned, some of those leaders help us with some of that change management and help.
Amazing. So what, just to play that back, it sounds like, and I think this is generally what we see, the two biggest metrics that you can track are relocator satisfaction and cost. Sort of you've set out the cost, sort of predicted cost. Is it roughly in line with that? If not, almost why not? Is it macro events that might be outside of your control? Is it you had, whatever it might be, sort of tweak there, and then relocate to satisfaction. How did you choose 80%? Because I think this is something that's quite disputed in the industry, and
Yeah.
it's some people are like, oh, we have like 99% satisfaction, and I'm always like, that seems a bit wonky, like, well, how did you choose 80%? Tell us about that.
Yeah, that is a great question. And we're still, honestly, that's still being debated a little bit. So right now, that's where we think we are. But,
nice.
Probably in 3 months, that might have changed a little bit. But I think really when it comes to, and I might say, we might look at the actual relocating satisfaction being higher than that, but 80% across all of the groups. So touching on the finance, how they're able to budget for it, how the business partners are able to address situations, the recruiters when they're talking to candidates, right? And so kind of pooling, that's like the overall everybody. But I think we might look at, the team members themselves, they definitely have more heavier weight, like more of a pull on that. So we might look on that being a little
but I love that nugget as well, is like, actually, particularly with this type of thing, it can be underestimated if it's simpler for talent acquisition, simpler for finance to administer. That is a huge benefit. There might not be like get an end of move survey every time if you're in finance talent acquisition, but don't forget to gather that data. I love that. And I think what we tend to say is make it relative. Use the same survey, and then you can compare sort of quarter on quarter, half year on half year, because it's so much is in the sort of the setup, where you're moving people to, etc. One other thing I wanted to pick up was making it a time-bound pilot, which we always advocate for as well, rather than a total number of moves, just because you said at the top, like, sometimes things trail for like a year, 2 years in relocation, and we've seen sometimes people slip into like, oh, we're going to do 100 moves or 150 moves, and then it's like, oh, well, like, when does that really end necessarily? And it's kind of, then it's like sort of this sort of never ending. It's better to be like, right, let's cut it off here, take the data we have at 3, 6, 9 months, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think it's getting over that perfection mindset, which I feel like it's really easy to get stuck there, and you're like almost have that fear of, I think it's, what is it called? Like, a fear of a better option, right? So you don't want to make any decisions because you're like, oh, but there might, be something a little bit better. But I feel like it's just important just to get started. And we actually learned that too with this pilot and putting this together, is because we kind of got stuck in that groove for a little bit. But just, be willing to try something, throw something out there. And even if something needs to be changed 6 months from now, you can do that, right?
Exactly. It's so true. Yeah, we sometimes refer to that as FOMO, fear of mucking up. And it's sort of like, because whenever you look at it, you then start going, oh, but like, this thing clearly is like not quite right, so like maybe that data doesn't count, or that was like not really a perfect thing. But then that just means you never really do anything, and it's never the right time, and like it feels like you just end up sort of limiting your options.
Yeah, and I love that comment too, with it feeling like it's never the right time, because I always everything is always, there's always something going on. Yeah. So it always feels like there's never a perfect time.
Exactly.
To make some moves.
Exactly. And just sort of kicking it down the road isn't necessarily the one. Let's talk one more question on the sort of core flex element. You're getting all this feedback from the different teams. I'm sure you had lots of debates about what to put in flex, what to put in core. Like, how did you end up sort of deciding which elements should go into core?
Yeah, and we went back and forth on this a lot when we were workshopping this. So we originally started out with core being extremely slim, and then as we were talking to the different groups and the different teams, because of some of those different categories of talent that relocate, they really wanted to increase some of the core on some of those. And so, but still with that mindset, right, that we don't still want to do too much core, because we want them to have all these flex options that they can pick from, and we have to balance it from a cost perspective. And so we tried to find that sweet spot, and we're hoping, that we're close to it, which we'll learn during this piloting period. But really just, I think when you break it down by talent level, so one of the things we did with this pilot is we used to provide lump sums to new college grads. So we've actually included them in this framework. So now they're getting services. So like new college grad might be a perfect example of someone you would think at that's probably at the lower level of the policy. And so, right, they get, 2 core and then they get to pick 2 or 3 flex, and then just increasing it from there. And so then you have your talent in the middle. That's like your technical experts, your critical skills, like let's beef up core a little bit there. And then at the very top, you think your executive suite. And so we're going to provide even some more core there, but still remaining a high flex. And then really we just have, so with the flex, like we'll provide, you get to choose from these options. But if you're like, hey, I actually, had my stuff taken care of, that's great. Then you just don't use that flex. So we don't do any cash out or any of that kind of thing. Just, what do you need? And if you don't need it, then perfect.
Exactly.
And we've actually seen that with one of our new college grads that moved. So they got a couple of core, a couple of flex, and they only used one of their flex options because they're like, hey, this is what I need. So
exactly. And then it's, you're not investing the cost in it, so it's sort of a win-win there. But they feel like they're not necessarily missing out as much because they've still got something. It's not like you're only going to get temporary accommodation or nothing, and then they're like, oh, I don't need temporary accommodation, so they feel like they want something in return. They're still getting some choice between things.
And I think too, when you think about, okay, we're going to start pulling back some benefits from the core, then that helps with that mindset of that cost concern, because, prior where you might have provided this in the core, you don't want to provide that in core. Now it becomes a flex that they can pick from. So you got to think that, you're losing some costs there because you're taking away from some of the core that you previously provided. And then now you're to funnel
exactly. Exactly. And this comes, so you've spoken there about how you vary the benefits based on seniority. So vary amount of like core services, vary the choice between different flex services. So that's obviously one parameter. And often then we hear, okay, this is great, but how do you then vary it based on distance traveled, so like length of relocation, family size, any other factors that you might potentially vary it on? How did you think about like what factors to vary the sort of range of benefits on?
Yeah, we didn't take into account family size, just because that kind of comes along. So you think about, right, where you might need more depending on family size, like you're going to have more flights, maybe a bigger temp housing. Those are all kind of already built into the benefits.
Yeah.
And so really where we have like where that family might come into a play is like some of the flex we offer is like maybe you have a kiddo that needs a little bit more enhanced like special ed with school type stuff. There's like some programs that can help with that, and so really building in different options within the flex to like address some of that variation. But really we felt like distance, we didn't include that at all because we moved away from kind of, I feel like distance is helpful if you do more of that lump sum, because it's like that mindset, the further away you are, you need more for, mileage or for goods shipment. But since we got away from that, really we felt like this talent of category made the most sense.
Yes.
And the feedback we've gotten so far, I actually just met with our recruiting group in North America last week, and they are loving it. Specifically, even the new college grads. So you think this group that prior, you think, oh, they just love to get this cash in hand. Like they have found that, and they are having such a better experience. They love the program. In fact, my recruiter that handles most of the new college grads is saying, like, what do I need to do to make sure like this rolls out next year so I could offer it to everybody? But it's been really well received so far.
I love that, and I think the couple of things. One, early careers, people think that they just love cash, and obviously it's kind of nice to receive cash, but often some of the heaviest users we see of services when they're provided them, they have some of the most questions. Like, not to say that they're like clueless, but obviously sometimes often it's their first move, so it sort of goes to sort of it's like a really good time to provide support.
Yeah, and I think too, just that duty of care aspect.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of times too, when you have a lump sum, you think, oh, but we provide them with resources. I feel like, they're most inclined to say, how can I spread this money the furthest and find the cheapest options, right? So even if you are providing resources, whether or not they're using it, right? So really just that duty of care aspect, like, hey, these are vetted company resources. We're taking care of you. We're putting you in a good temp housing situation for a couple of weeks, right? Like, we're going to help you really settle in so you can hit the ground running in your new job. So, you're more focused on onboarding and meeting your new team and all the other transitions that come along with having to relocate. relocate.
Yeah, exactly. And that will be a conversation for another day. But the one, because I think that sort of time to productivity, offer acceptance rate from a talent acquisition perspective is a oft underestimated part of having a good early careers program. But I did want to sort of pick up that real golden nugget you mentioned around how simplification for like internal HR teams is so much easier, because we constantly hear how like it's just like stressful trying to remember all these different policies and all these different things, and it's like, oh wait, I'm recruiting someone and they've got a family and then they're moving this distance, so what does that mean? The more you can simplify it, the easier they then have confidence, and that then reduces exceptions because they have confidence in what the framework is and why. So then you don't just get less of the but this person negotiated an extra $3,000 or an extra, said they needed a month, or their car had to be shipped, or whatever it is, because it's just like, no, this is well thought out, well reasoned, etc. What a review that's been. How long has it taken from sort of kicking off the project to the start line of the pilot?
Yes, we originally kicked off in July of 2023. And then we had so many revisions with the framework and the structure and just all of that, those focus groups we did and everything. So we kicked off July, and then we actually started the pilot in April of this year.
Nice. That's not too bad really for a company of Micron's size. 9 months and a hell of a lot of work. And like I can tell, you're onto it. It sounds like the pilot's going to go well, and you'll make the tweaks. So thank you for being so generous with the breakdown. So many more questions I could ask you, but we'll save them for a separate podcast because we're rapidly going through time. And as you know, we have a tradition on the pod of the previous guest leaving a question for the next guest. And the question for you today, Nikki, is it feels like there's been a move away from traditional assignments, long-term assignments, short-term assignments, more towards permanent transfers when possible in the global mobility community over the past 10, 15 years. Do you think there'll be a revival in traditional assignment types over the next 5-10 years? And maybe to slightly broaden the question, how do you think about when an assignment is appropriate versus when a permanent transfer is appropriate?
Ooh, so much there. I love it.
Yeah, tough question for you. Really tough one for you. So
yeah, I definitely agree with that mindset that it seems like the permanent transfers have been overtaking the assignments. I do think within the next 5 years, we're going to see an uptake in short-term assignments. So assignments under a year. And I think part of that is because we're going to start seeing companies doing more job rotations. That's really kind of one of the hot topics right now with trying to retain talent and,
hire fewer people. It's just rotate them through. Yeah.
So I think as we start to increase job rotations and we'll to just that technology skill type transfer, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more pickup in that kind of, less than a year, but more than a couple of months realm. I really think as far as comparing an assignment to a permanent transfer, it can be hard to do, but you got to really look at what is the end goal. So is the intent that you are going to eventually hire local talent and you're there to train someone, right? Is the intent from the team member perspective in their mind, like I am returning home, right? I'm not planning on transferring and living here. And so this can be really challenging though, especially when you're trying to balance costs with the business. But I think if you can kind of try to keep that, end goal intent in mind, if it's really meant to be a temporary, it should really be an assignment. Again, you get pushback on that because of the cost. So they're like, no, we're just going to transfer somebody for a year and then transfer them back. But we try and remind people they're so that is so disruptive for the team members' lives because there's so much that comes in with, you're taking them off their home payroll. They're going to start losing all these other things there. And so just trying to say, hey, again, we're focusing on the experience standpoint. So if we're going to say that team member and employee experience is important to us, let's back that up. And if there's a need for an assignment, then it should get approved, right? Again,
Yeah.
this is all a lot easier said and talking about than in
Yeah,
reality.
yeah, exactly. And then in reality, someone will come along and say, "Yeah, but I'm not going to approve the cost if it's an assignment, but I will approve it if it's a transfer." And you're like, "Oh, okay," in that
Right.
situation. So, yeah, it's
But I
so
think that's
tough.
where it comes in, where we try and be like consultative
Yeah,
to the business, right? Like
exactly.
we want you to use our program to support your strategic, like we want you
It's
to use our program strategically to support your needs. And how can we meet together to make that work?
I think that's such a nice way to finish, because we have the expertise. We can say, hey, typically we recommend an assignment in this instance for the great reasons you spelt out. We understand that's more expensive, so in theory you could do it as a transfer and transfer them back. It's going to be more affordable. It's your budget ultimately, so it's kind of like, yeah, here it is, but here's why, and clearly explaining the pros and cons of doing it various ways, and that's how you build a strategic partner to the business, rather than you absolutely have to do it sort of this way, because then people go, forget it.
Yeah. And then next time they're not going to come to talk to you about it, right?
Exactly. They're just going to do it.
Right.
And then you start going, oh, that's weird that we've had a massive drop in when we
Right.
haven't heard anything with that team. It's like, it looks like they've got a lot of international people there. So, yeah. Anyway, Nikki, I could talk to you all day. This has been great fun. Thank you for being so in the weeds with me today. It's been so great to tear down your policy revamp, and honestly, so well done. I know a lot of work's gone into that, and it's been great timing to have you on and discuss all the hard work from you and the team. So thanks very much for coming on. Great job by you.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's been so fun. Thank you.
Cheers, Nikki. Bye bye.